And we are live. Hello, everybody. My name is Hetal Doshi. I'm an organizational psychologist, and part of our ongoing initiative to support the mental well being of our community is something that we've picked up um, to do over and above what we're doing every single day. And hopefully, it adds a lot of light to all of you who are listening in. As part of this initiative, we're interviewing experts in areas of mental health, as well as everyday heroes just like you and I. Today we have Richard Bradburry from BFM. Some of you would have heard about him. Some of you will probably know what he looks like, but majority of you would definitely know what he sounds like. In just a couple of minutes, you're going to hear this super high gold standard voice very shortly. But Richard's been in this industry for a very long time, and he's definitely gone through some highs and lows, which he'll share about later. He's also been in scenarios where he has supported the Olympics and so on and so forth. So I'll just pass it on to Rich. Richard, can you share a little bit about yourself and how you ended up getting into this world?
Sure. Hi, Hetal, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to come along today. How did I get into radio and how did I get into interviewing? It was kind of by accident, I guess. It originally started when I was at university back in about 1999, something like that. I just started there, and there was a rugby match that was happening outside of the halls of residence where I was staying, and the team that I was kind of rooting for was doing particularly badly. And somebody had brought along a microphone and a PA system, and so I just kind of started, for a bit of fun, commenting on the match and kind of joking against the opposing team, and just trying to put them off, basically. And I really enjoyed doing it. People picked up on it, and then about a week later, the university radio station called me in for a little bit of an interview and a discussion, and they asked if I could help out on a radio show that they were doing called Deluded Radio, which was a bit of an homage to a TV show that was going out at the time called Jackass. I don't know if you remember that, where people essentially did silly little jokes and pranks on one another. And it was just one of those silly little things that I started on doing that first. And then I kind of left it for a little while because I didn't know if that was what I wanted to do. I wasn't studying radio or anything.
Right.
And then it kind of rediscovered me when I was doing some voiceovers a few years later, which, again, I'd fallen into kind of accidentally for a company that I was working for. And it really kicked off when I moved to China, I guess. I was kind of in between for a little while. And it wasn't until about 2004, 2005, where my career kind of, I guess, really picked up.
So, very important question. Did your team win?
They did. They did.
Oh, congratulations. Well done. The power of putting somebody else off, huh? Instead of trying to motivate your team. Yeah, power of persuading. Yeah. Right. Do you remember some of the things that you were saying that persuaded them or pushed them away?
Well, probably, but not something I'd feel probably comfortable airing on such a family-friendly platform,
All right. Okay. So a lot of people dream, I guess if you're in broadcasting or if you study broadcasting or mass communication, they dream about being on radio. They dream about being selected to be a DJ or a VJ. And you didn't have a dream of it. You were asked to get into it. How do you feel about that when there are so many other people struggling to get into this industry?
I genuinely feel blessed, and I felt this quite a lot throughout my life. I seem to have been in the right place at the right time and ready to do the things that I need to do to get what I want, or to put myself in a position where I can get what I want. When I was in China, when I first moved there, I had no idea what I was going to do. I'd essentially moved there on a whim. I had no job. I didn't know the language. I didn't know anything. And a friend of mine put the radio on, and there was a broadcast in English. And I thought to myself, well, I've done voiceovers. I have a real love of radio. How can I get involved with this? And I just kind of very quickly recorded a demo on a laptop on a headset mic, sent the demo in, and within 24 hours I was there for an interview, and then shortly afterwards I'd got the job. And so it was a case of me just being incredibly lucky, incredibly pushy, I guess, and not being afraid of just asking or just trying. And because you never know.
Yeah.
Sometimes these opportunities are just there. You just don't know that they're there.
Hmm. Do you feel lucky?
Very.
Yeah.
Radio for me was something that was, when I was growing up, it was that, it was something that broke the silence. It was the noise in the room. It was somebody I could listen to when, my family or my parents were out doing their things, or if I was alone at night, I would put on the radio and listen to some of my favorite DJs over there, and how they were kind of playing my songs. And it felt like one of the coolest things to do was to just play your favorite songs and tell people at home why you loved playing those songs.
Hmm.
It was like the grand mixtape for people. And if you know what a mixtape is, you know
I
what I
do.
mean.
Yeah.
It's about, once you can create a mixtape for somebody and it resonate with somebody, and then keep coming back, hoping that you're going to play something for them, I think is a wonderful connection.
Yeah. I love that you say that it's something that broke the silence.
Yeah,
That's really powerful. And it is something that stays with you when you're alone in the
yeah,
middle of the night, where it's probably the worst time of the day or a phase of your life to be in, which is that sense of
yeah,
loneliness. And you actually just saying that reminded me of the time when I was a kid. And we used to have our favorite radio DJs, and we used to love the songs that used to play. We just love their vibe, and they were so much part of our lives. And they didn't even know that. They didn't even know who we were, but we knew everything
right,
about them. And
right,
and that kind of kept us going through really difficult exams. That kind of brought a lot of friends together. That kind of brought two generations of people together just because we would sing and dance to certain people that we loved. And I think I've never really looked at it that way.
yeah,
I've always experienced it, but you've articulated it perfectly. Yeah, definitely broke
it's
the silence and
right.
increased connection in a world that may have seemed lonely, even in those days when we didn't have too much technology.
Well, I think what's so powerful about radio is that for that person in the room who's broadcasting, they're not necessarily thinking about the thousands, the hundreds, and in some markets the millions of people that are listening. A good radio host, a good DJ, is thinking of one person who's in a room by themselves and how you can make that person feel better about themselves. That for me is what's important about it.
Wow.
Hmm.
Wow, that's amazing. So
Hmm.
there is a lot of presence then. You're very
Yeah,
present and you're really
absolutely.
focused on one human entity rather than the collective that is
That- yeah,
invisible to your eyes.
yeah.
That's really powerful. Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, yeah. Mm.
And I just wanted to talk a little bit about luck, if that's okay. I think that's a
Sure.
concept that I've become more and more interested in.
Mm.
Um, I've heard some people say, 30% of it is luck. Some people say 70% of it is luck. You may not want to quantify it, but to what extent, or how do you describe this thing called luck? If I know it's a very invisible experience, it may be a feeling, but how would you describe the word luck?
Um, Interesting question. I think it's just a connection of powerful forces. I don't. I'm not entirely sure about whether or not I believe in fate, or your life is already ruled out for you, or signed out for you, or anything like that. What I do think is that there are periods in your life where you might face a particular crossroads, um, and something nudges you in a particular direction at a particular time. Um,
Mhm.
and I think luck has something to do with that slight nudge. It might
Mm.
be an inkling, it might be a gut feeling, it might be, just a snippet of a conversation that you hear somewhere. Uh, and I think all of those little things combined create what luck is. And if you pay attention to those little things, you can find
Mm.
yourself being quite lucky.
Mm. Going back
Yeah,
to the time where you sent that demo,
yeah.
um, um, was there a nudge? Was there something telling you to do it? Was it something that you were paying attention to?
Uh,
Because you said that there is a nudge, and you
yeah.
said that it is about something that you hear from somewhere and something that if you pay attention enough to, it is there. We don't know what it is, but it's there. So when you
Mm.
sent out the demo, was there something that you were listening to?
Um, I think there, to be entirely honest, I think there was a small sense of small town boy arrogance. If I'm entirely honest, it was a case of this. I'd grown up in a very small town, and I'd done whatever I could to get out of there. And so there was a bit of a fighting spirit. And when I heard people broadcasting in English, I thought to myself, well, I think I could probably do better than that,
Mm,
or at least match it. And if I can
mm,
do that on a cheap headset mic and a cheap laptop, then in some
mm,
ways I'm proving something to myself and to
mm,
these people that could potentially be employing me.
mm,
That you give me stone tools and I could I can help create something, hopefully.
mm.
Yeah, so it's about using whatever you have to be able to create something useful.
And do you still have this small town boy arrogance? Or
Um,
has that been whacked out of you
Oh, it was
completely?
whacked many years ago. But every now and again, it still rears its small little ugly head. You know,
Mm,
yeah, I think a lot of people who kind of, they think that maybe moving abroad somewhere and living outside of your home country is an easy thing to do, and it's not.
mm,
Um, because often you're leaving everything that you know behind to kind of start afresh, and you have no connections really. You don't have a network, and I think that arrogance moves to something else. You have to be kind of humble. You have to learn how to network. You have to know who can help you out and how you can help them out, and what you can
mm,
do for one another. Because if you go
mm,
around with this kind of chip on your shoulder, you're not going to get very far very quickly, especially in something like the entertainment industry, or
mm,
if you're doing interviews or anything, or particular broadcast industry for sure.
mm. What do you mean by if you walk around with a chip on your shoulder, you're not going to go far in this industry? What do
Well,
you mean by that?
what I mean is that if you look at you can see broadcasters elsewhere, or you can see particularly nowadays with stuff like the influence of the social media influencer, for example, they serve a purpose in society right now. But there are some of them out there that already assume that because they have a mass of followers, that they have power to persuade people. They have that
Mm,
they have that itch to show people just how good they are, and what
mm.
they can do to make your life better. And I'm kind of looking back at myself now and thinking that was probably me when I was younger. But there's a level of arrogance, thinking that you can kind of change the world very quickly. Uh,
Mm,
yeah, it's, I suppose, chip on your shoulder just kind of means too much arrogance.
right. And that obviously doesn't do well for you or anyone, but specifically in the media
Yeah.
industry.
I
Yeah.
mean, because people know that, and they'll be aware that you can be hard to work with. You can be a little bit stubborn. That person who's a little bit pig-headed. They don't want to listen to
Mm,
advice.
mm,
They just want to do things one way. Uh,
mm.
can be difficult to work with.
Absolutely. And mm, as you grew in your career, um,
Mm,
what is something pivotal that helped you to go from good to great? Because when we think about Richard Bradbury, when we think about BFM, we think about the kind of stuff that you do.
mm,
Um, that is obviously, you know that someone like that has gone through some kind of a milestone and gone from good to great or even
mm,
exceptional. So
mm.
what were maybe one or two episodes that kind of helped you to make a huge leap, where the rest of us maybe just taking one small step at a time, small step. You must have gone through a huge leap. Do you remember one or two incidents that
I,
propelled
I,
you?
re- I remember stuff actually from before I was in broadcast, even when I was a kid. And it definitely started there because I had a kind of quite a difficult childhood. I was a sickly child, and I knew that I was never going to be a sporting champion or something. Um, I had a twisted back, I had twisted legs, I had a bit of a speech problem, I had confidence issues. And I think what really helped pull me through that and give me an air of confidence was sitting with family who had nothing was a taboo subject. We spoke about everything, all the way through, from religion to politics to gender to sex. Everything was discussed. And even as a child, you were not considered, to not have an opinion. Your opinion mattered. And so that was one thing. And then moving on through performing arts, when I did I did 2 years of performing arts, there was a guy there who kind of really instilled in me this idea of wearing this invisible suit of armor almost, so that when people kind of talk to you, and it could be something offensive, it could be something that really annoys you or upsets you, it just kind of washes off. And then at the end of that day, you take that suit of armor off and you just kind of carry on as if nothing happened. So that's how it kind of prepared me for doing something like this. But I think the one thing that was very pivotal was in Beijing when we were broadcasting a show, and it was dual language, so it was Mandarin and English, and my level of Mandarin back then was pretty bad. I'd relied so heavily on audio cues from my guest, that obviously if you're not understanding a language, those audio cues aren't necessarily there because you don't know what they're saying. So you then have to kind of look for things like visual cues and mirroring and how comfortable that person is. And then you can kind of look at doing things a different way. So I think my interview style and the way in which I approached it changed somewhat during that period.
That seems unreasonably difficult.
Yes.
Unreasonably difficult. So if you're not able to get cues from words, then what cues are the ones that you rely on the most?
And this is something that I do. Let's say, for example, I have a guest come into the office or the studio for an interview. There are certain things that I will do during that kind of pre-interview session. And it depends on who the guest is or how I want them prepared. And it also depends on the kind of guest that you have, but the first thing for me is making them feel incredibly comfortable, because if you have a very comfortable guest, placid guest, they're more likely to open up for you. So it's about making that guest comfortable. And then once they are comfortable, it can be very easy to pick up on both visual and audio cues then, because their guard is down. They're already there for a couple of reasons. They're either there because they really want to be there, like some entrepreneur who's trying to sell his product and wants to be on air. And so will say as much as they want to say, or they're somebody who's been sent there perhaps by their PR company and might not necessarily want to be there and is uncomfortable about being on radio. So it's about breaking through that barrier, making them comfortable. And then it's a combination for me. If they're in the studio, visual cues, where they're looking, how they're responding to the questions that I'm asking is something that I rely on quite heavily. But yeah, audio cues is a big thing in radio, obviously, because most of the time you might not be able to see your guest. You might be talking to them on a phone or on Skype or whatever. And so you've got to be very attentive. And so often you're dealing with the technicalities of microphones and microphone levels and listening and making sure your waveform is okay, but also trying to pay attention to the answers to the questions that you're asking.
So that's really, really, really powerful. And that has nothing to do with necessarily being on radio. What you're trying to say, and what I've heard indirectly, is that when you make someone really comfortable, they reveal themselves to you. And they're a lot more accessible. And you get a lot more out of any kind of cue that they are presenting themselves to you.
Yes.
And what's beautiful is that it's not even visual. It's something that's more energetic. It could be your audio. It could just be a sense that you have as well. So you obviously would have ended up becoming someone very intuitive or very
Yeah.
sensitive to a lot of things as well.
Uh, I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
And I think, I can tell within a few minutes of somebody being in a room whether or not they're comfortable and
Mm.
what kind of way would be the best, excuse me, to approach them and to start a discussion, or how to break the ice.
Yeah.
And I was, when we were younger, the kind of conversations that we had was all about being level with one another, so whether or not
Mm.
I was speaking to an uncle or a grandparent or whatever, everybody was on equal footing. And I
Mm.
think that great leveler within radio is something incomparable.
Mm.
And it's something that I have often struggled with when it comes to Asian culture, perhaps, and that
I was
idea
just
of,
going to ask you that.
yeah, yeah. And so at first, I was very conscious of it, and it kind of altered the way for a little while in which I would approach my interviews. It would be, hi Datuk, hi, Datin, or whatever. And whilst that is the socially respectable thing to do,
Mm.
once I've kind of established that, I understand that you are this person, I kind of get rid of it, and I speak to these people as if they are a normal person. And I think most of them, not all of them, obviously, but most of them don't have a problem with that. They
Yeah.
will come down, and they will talk to you on the same level, because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We all like to talk. We're all curious. And so once you connect with somebody like that and you're cheeky enough to be able to get away with doing it, and if you can crack a smile, that's it. You've already won.
Yeah. I definitely would empathize with the big shift culturally.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that you say that, at the start, that kind of threw you a little bit off
Yeah.
from being just Richard Bradbury
Yeah.
to then just saying, okay, I'm going to respect a little bit of it, but I'm also going to be myself.
Yeah.
And it was just probably like a small little shift, not something that was tragically different. It was
Right.
quite definitely a very, very unique experience. And I love that you say that at the end of the day, all of us just want to be human beings. And we
Yeah.
all, actually, I mean, that's how we were born, right? So we still prefer that level of a connection.
Right.
And no connection that is different from that original connection that we have as human beings, as children, is ever going to be more powerful than
Right.
that. Yeah. And I want to know, have you done any experiments in the past to see what is it that you do that is quickest to get somebody into a space of comfort? So what are things that you have tried, and maybe what is something that works all the time? So it could be a statement, could be a question, could be I don't know, water. I'm not sure, anything.
There's a couple of things. Again, it depends in kind of, and this can get quite scientific in many ways, and it depends on what frame of mind you and what state you want your guest to be in. There are times when, and this again will depend on the kind of guest that you have. If you are interviewing somebody, for example, who's in the entertainment industry, and that they are going to be willing to talk, and you might be interview number 4 of that day. They've already been through 4 or 5 different interviews in that day. You know that they probably want to get in there, do what they need to do, and get out. And so it's a case of being able to form rapport very, very quickly. And so normally people mock the English for saying, "Oh, how's the weather over there?" We're not asking how the weather is. That's an icebreaker, But it's really simple questions like, how was your journey over here? Did you have to come far? Can I get you a glass of water? Do you have any pets? How's your day been? All very, very simple questions that are, quite disarming, which have a very, very powerful impact, because you're getting directly to the emotion. If somebody starts talking about their cat or their dog or whatever,
Yeah.
you're connecting with something very, very simple. And
Yeah.
if you're giving them a glass of water, then you're showing that, I also get thirsty too. So let's share this glass of water. Let's share this cup of tea. But on the flip side, if you are wanting to get somebody into a frame of mind where you might want them to be, and it doesn't happen often, but you might want them to be kind of combative or whatever, or you might want them to be kind of a little bit aggressive when you're asking them a bunch of questions. Little things like just leaving them out in the cold a little bit. What I mean by that is, I shouldn't be saying this, but what I mean by that is you can just leave them for a little while, not long, just maybe a minute or two, just to kind of stew in their own little thoughts. And it's a very, very powerful tool when somebody has been left waiting. And broadcasters will know that, because we've often been on the flip side. If a guest is late, because radio is very, very time sensitive. If you're turning up 5 minutes before an interview, you don't have time to prepare really, and that can be a very important thing for somebody.
Wow.
So yeah, just breaking the ice very, very quickly is something that comes with practice, and just not being afraid to make a bit of a fool out of yourself, and cracking a joke and having a bit of fun with them always seems to work.
Yeah, there was actually one piece of research that came about does giving somebody warm tea or cold water, does that actually create a difference in the next moments of interaction? So yeah, definitely keeping them out in the cold, literally, right. Temperature-wise, definitely does something to human beings. It probably shuts them up a little bit, increases defense mechanisms, so on and so forth.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, I love that this is scientific. That's awesome. You don't have to leave it to chance then. Yeah, so how many people have you kept in the icebox then, Richard?
Not too many. Not too many.
All right. I'll just be wary the next time I come into BFM with you guys, yeah? Be like, am I in the hot zone or in the cold zone? All right. So what have been probably the 1 or 2 most challenging times that have thrown you off guard and made you maybe even want to quit your job for good?
Oh, that's an easy question there, Hettel. Made me want to quit my job. I wouldn't say it's made me want to quit. What I would say is that it was a period of darkness, I guess. I'd been, and I don't kind of want to put a date on it or time on it, because then it could be easily identifiable. But there were periods when I was looking at so much hard news, stuff about kidnappings and deaths and one thing or another. And it was from the moment that I woke up to the moment that I went to bed. And that's the kind of research that I was doing for news stories. And when you're doing it day in, day out, months on end, even if you're not particularly broadcasting that news, or you have to kind of consume it so that somebody else can use that news story, and you're producing it for somebody else, it can really, really get you down. And it's at that point where you kind of have to make that decision about your mental health as to whether or not you want to be doing this particular thing forever, and it can be very difficult to compartmentalize these kind of things as well, because it will seep in through those compartments. You'll be thinking about it a lot. And so I had to make a decision of, I think I want to move away from the harder side of news stuff and focus perhaps on something a little bit lighter, where I can have conversations, where I can have discussions. So that was a period that was kind of dark. And then, stuff like MH370, when we're dealing with that over at the radio station, and we're having to talk to people who've been involved in the investigation, and everybody at the station at the time was really, as professional as they were, everybody was having a tough time with it, because nothing like that had happened before. And I think there were people there that, they wanted to make sure that we were getting the most accurate news out as possible. It had to be pretty quick. You had to be really on the ball. So in some ways, you kind of had to kind of disassociate from that as well, and deliver it that way. And that can cause problems, I think. And I think a lot of people may have had a difficult time with that, myself included, for sure. I know that.
Wow. I had never thought about it that way. I mean, I think I've been maybe a little bit more self-centric. I always thought that maybe, medical doctors or psychologists who are exposed to a lot of traumatic experiences would definitely experience a lot of seeping of this negative energy into your body, and then you end up getting or having a very similar experience with the other person. So
Yeah.
if they are fearful, you become fearful. So the energy gets exchanged just like that.
Yeah.
I never thought about it for newscasters. I never thought that. Yeah, I never thought, and that's kind of silly because you would have to absolutely absorb it. You'd have to internalize it, and then you'd have to share it in a very meaningful and still engaging manner,
Right.
and without ever really knowing how to clean yourselves up.
Well,
Um,
that's it. I mean, broadcast at the end of the day is often taking a very difficult topic and kind of diluting it to make it very simple for somebody to understand, the end user to understand. And to do that effectively, you have to take on as much of that information as you can and know all about it before you kind of spit it out, if you know what I mean. And
yeah,
so you are internalizing a lot of it. Yeah.
and wow, okay, this is really news for me because we've always looked at doing research on mental health like nurses or doctors or pilots, people in military. We call these high risk environments. But the
Mm.
ones who are doing news on a day-to-day basis, and especially breaking news or news that's really hot out there, even COVID-19, I never once ever thought, well, they must be suffering. They must be going through something
Yeah.
intense because they're absorbing it all the time. Are you ever taught as journalists to how to clean yourselves up energetically or emotionally? Are you ever taught how to do that, or are
I
you just
mean,
expected to?
I wouldn't. I don't necessarily have the qualifications to call myself a journalist. First, let me just clarify that. But I know of people who have been to journalism school, and they have they've gone on to do very, very high profile jobs in very, very difficult areas, and they've had specific training on how to deal with things physically. Let's say, for example, you may be kidnapped, or there may be an earthquake or something.
Mm,
So they've been taught how to physically deal with that and how to physically deal with things like interrogations and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, once these people have kind of moved from that area where they've been dispatched to,
mm,
not many people, they're kind of dispatched and just expected to get on with it
mm,
and be mentally strong, being that, have that keep your chin up kind of thing. And I've seen a lot of people kind of suffer and break down when they come home from the office. And I'm not so sure if services are necessarily provided properly for journalists that have been in those areas. I'm guessing there will be in other markets, perhaps in the UK, when people have been deployed back from a war zone or something. They may have that, but
mm.
I don't know, Hetal. It's
Yeah,
definitely something that plays on people's minds for sure, especially when you're talking
yeah.
about today.
Yeah, and I mean, wow. I actually feel really ignorant right now. I feel completely ignorant because the worst thing about what you guys are doing is repetition.
Hmm.
So a lot of us, like psychs or doctors or whatever it is, although it is more or less the same kind of experiences that we hear from people. I'm not saying it's always the same, but it's not uniquely different. Um, there are different flavors to it.
Mm,
And it's not the same thing repeating over and over again. But in
mm.
the news industry, is repetition over and over and over and over again about the same topic.
Yes.
And there is nothing worse for the brain when it is constantly repeating the same words or similar language, and in a negative context, and in very short bursts. There's
Right.
nothing worse than
It's the
that.
opposite of a positive mantra. You know,
Hmm.
you're. I mean,
Oh my God.
if you're tuning into any news station right now, whether it's CNN, or ABC, BFM, whatever station, the continuing discussion is COVID-19 and finding that balance between what people need to hear and not stressing people out by repeating the same thing over and over and over again. It's a very difficult balance to find, and
Mm,
I don't know if you've ever been in the UK during the holiday season when you might hear holiday music start in September and it goes all the way through to wherever. And if you've ever worked in the retail industry, you will know that those people, the second that Christmas music or whatever has stopped, you can see them just kind of have this burst of, oh, it's done. And that can be applied to hearing the same news over and over again. There's this sense of oppression almost, and it grinds you down. And I'm sure that there are people at home who just don't want to hear about it anymore. It's not that they don't want to face the reality of it. They already know the reality of it. They just want time away from it. They need that third space.
Yeah, and you can't.
And we can't.
Yeah, and you can't, because I was just talking to Dr. Prem. You may or may not know him, but he's a psychiatrist in Penang Adventist Hospital. And he was just saying that he was just talking a little bit about the most vulnerable groups in this context of COVID-19. And he said the most vulnerable group, more than any other group that you could imagine, are the ones who are obsessed about the news. So the ones who are constantly monitoring and reading and listening to the news. And I can only imagine that on the flip side, it's the ones who have to constantly put it out there, and you don't have a choice of being able to get out of it. And we've kind of forgotten about you guys. And I'm sorry for that. I'm really, really quite empathetic towards what you guys are definitely going through. I kind of just never personalized or humanized what you guys are doing. That's strange.
Don't get me wrong. I'm just giving you my opinion. There are people out there, very good journalists, who have no problem dealing with this. This is what they were born to do, and they love dealing with this level of stress. And that balance of anxiety is what they thrive on. But then, there are other people out there who, find it really difficult.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to say that, they're thriving out there because anxiety is what they, is their fix. It's like, just saying that, smoking is a fix. Negative news is just a bad thing, completely a bad thing. And okay. Well, we're not going to go down that rabbit hole.
Okay.
So I really, really hope that all of you get the help and support that you need. What keeps you sane? What keeps you sane during these times? Or keeps you super happy, kind of forget about everything, life's all good all over again?
I think like most people, I'm probably hitting Netflix a lot harder than I normally would. Reading quite a bit, just kind of zoning out. I have a little garden on the front of the house that I kind of potter around in. I play a bit of guitar. I catch up with family, and it's just that case of just tuning out all the noise, getting off social media for a little while, not reading the news. And sometimes it'll get to a weekend, Friday will happen, and I'll just switch off all of my digital devices and just connect with the people that I'm around. And I say that, and I'm sure there's probably people here at home right now rolling their eyes, saying, "No, you don't." Because part of you still wants to stay a little bit connected, but I like to just switch off and almost forget that it's happening. Almost forget that we're in the situation that we're in right now.
And your cat as well, I'm sure.
Oh yes, a couple of cats. They run around and cause no end of mischief. Yes,
yeah, that's awesome. So, what is something that we don't know about you that you have maybe personally gone through? And if you're comfortable to share, what was a very deep, dark moment in your life? What did life look like then for Richard Bradburry? And how did you cross that line? What was the hardest moment for you in your life?
I think probably when my father passed away a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. And I briefly alluded to, being away from home and that was probably, I would say the most difficult period in my life, because thankfully my brother was here with me. He'd been traveling for a little while, but we got the news of the sudden passing of my father, and he'd been, as far as we knew, he'd been perfectly healthy, and it was a case of we'd been out the night before, we were having some fun. And I got a phone call from my mother, and it was very kind of emotionless almost, how she delivered the news via voicemail. And I think the fact that I was so far away from home and we didn't know what had happened. We didn't know how we were going to get back. We just had no idea of what was, being planned. And it was just before his birthday as well. So we were, planning on having a bit of a surprise kind of online get together and one thing or another. And the next thing that we know, he'd passed. We'd been planning for him to come over here for his 70th birthday and spend some time up in Langkawi. And I still struggle to this day to kind of get over his death, because I feel guilty that there was so much distance between us and I hadn't been going home as often as I should, in my mind, and so I still struggle with that. Not talking to him as often as I perhaps could have done, not contributed, all of these things of guilt, and this is something that I know will always be there, and will never go away. It's just that these waves will kind of be further apart rather than closer together as they were at the time of his passing. Yeah, I struggle with that quite a lot.
And this is 4 years, 4 years on?
Yeah, for it will be 5 years later this month, actually. Yeah.
Well, I'm really sorry to hear.
Thank you. Thank you.
What was life like? I'm hoping that I'm not crossing too many boundaries over here.
Not at all.
But I've had, in our experience of dealing with a lot of people, we hear stories of parents passing away, and that is one of the most difficult things to kind of, betrayal of a loved one, getting divorced, and all of that is very painful. But it's the time was done, and that was it.
Yeah.
But the sudden death of someone that you love, you didn't see it coming. That if you had a bit more time, you would do something differently. But it happens, and it happened. What did life look like then? What did you look like? What were you eating, sleeping? How would you describe life then?
The strange thing was, Hettel, that shortly after finding out that he'd passed away, my brain kind of went into this very strange mode where I kind of went back to, I announced the news to my brother, who was staying with me at the time here in Malaysia. He was here on holiday. And I went back to bed for a little while and woke up, and I'd got a hair appointment. And so I went out and had my hair cut. And the guy that was cutting my hair just asked me a simple question. He's like, "How are you? How are things going?" And I said, "Oh, okay, yeah, my dad died last night." And he just looked at me as if it was the strangest thing, And it was at that period in my life where I'm like, okay, well, clearly that's not normal behavior to just kind of get up, go out and live life normally. And it was then that I kind of realized that it had a deeper impact on me that I was trying to avoid. I just wanted life to be back to normal, and didn't want to accept that what I'd heard was true. And I think what played on my mind a lot more was not just the fact that my father had passed away suddenly. It was the fact that my mum was left alone over in the UK, and she's not in the best of health and hasn't been for quite some time. Me and my brother were doing our own things. I was here in Malaysia. He was off doing his travels. And how are we going to deal with the funeral? What happens after the funeral? How do we make sure that mum is okay? Because we both got careers, doing things overseas or and so there was this strange few months of like, how do you kind of get through that? And I took a period of time off work. I think I was off work for about maybe 2 or 3 months, just trying to deal with things with my brother. And hats off to my brother, incidentally, whose birthday it is today.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, it's his big 40th. Hi, Scott. He was dealing with it extremely well, much better than I ever could. And to this day, I know he struggles too. But there are certain things that kind of, I don't know, it changed everybody's fundamental relationship around our small little, because we were a very small, tight-knit family. There was just the four of us, my brother, my mum, my dad, and me. And so to have such an integral part of that group just snatched away was difficult. Very dark period. Yeah.
And there is this sense, are you the older brother or are
Yeah,
you the younger
I'm
one?
the
You're
older
the older
brother. Yeah,
brother.
yeah.
Is there a sense of, pressure on you being the older brother at
I,
all?
I think there is, but I think there are some things that my younger brother deals with a lot better than I do. Uh,
Mm,
um, and I think there's elements of I'm the person that ran away, and so that kind of is an issue for me sometimes too. I deal with that quite a lot. I have that feeling of
mm,
guilt of having left things behind and kind of like just doing what Richard wants to do, and so there's
mm,
that kind of sits quite heavily here as well sometimes.
mm.
Yeah. So there you go.
What helps make it lighter?
Um,
What helps make it lighter?
Talking to my mum, and there was she's a funny character. She's a very strong woman, and she used to have these wonderful stories of when me and my brother were growing up. That makes it light. Kind of revisiting old pictures now that it's not so much painful to look back at these pictures.
Mm,
Uh, it's more of that sense of nostalgia that I can look back and have a
mm,
moment. I can smile about it. I can have a bit of a giggle about it. That makes it lighter. It comes, like I say, it comes less and less. But recently, oddly enough, I was eating something at home, and it was something that I'd not had for a very long time. And the first mouthful of this food reminded me so much of my father uh, that it made me cry. It was just a mouthful of food, and I started crying, and I couldn't understand why. And it was just realizing that this small little connection had, yeah,
yeah.
triggered my emotions.
Oh, Richard, you're making me cry. This is terrible.
I'm
This
sorry.
is no, this is really. I mean, I think we should all really be educated about um, this process
Mm,
because this is the only thing that we're guaranteed in life, right? Like
mm,
the fact that the people that we love, we're going to die, obviously.
mm.
Oh my God, this is horrible. Um, and the reason why it's painful is because every time I speak to people and we go through, either therapy or getting them back to their performance game because we work in the space of organizational psychology. Everything goes back to performance again. It's really really tough, and I experience this a lot more with our male clients.
Mm.
Just recently we had someone who's gone through something maybe similar to what you have as well, and that the feeling of guilt was there. We should have done something. I should have spent more time. Yada yada yada. And
Mm.
I'm just thinking, okay, come on. We all know this. Okay, as human beings, we all know this. We all know that there is only one thing that's guaranteed. That is death. We just
Yeah,
don't know how it's going to happen, but we know it.
yeah.
And yet, it is one of the most painful experiences.
Mm.
Um, do you think we should be educated on this, or do you think education will not make a difference in reducing our suffering about the death of the people that we love?
I mean, as human beings, we're conditioned to know that you know uh,
Yeah.
our time here is finite. Um,
Mm,
I don't think there is any easy way of communicating to somebody
mm,
that of how to deliver that news or how to receive that news. And
mm,
the problem with this is this wasn't the first time. My parents had come to visit me in China, and my mother's father had passed away whilst he was in China. And it was
mm,
my parents' first time that they'd gotten on an aeroplane in 20 years.
mm,
They didn't want to fly, they couldn't afford it. Um, they'd come into some money, and they'd come to visit me for the first time in a very long time. They'd
mm,
gone outside of the UK, and
mm,
whilst they were there, my father's mother passed away, and so I had to break that news to him, and I'd never had to do that. And then a short few years later, I have to break the news to my brother that our father had passed away, and I had absolutely no idea of how I was going to do that. Um, no, there's no easy way of educating somebody about delivering that piece of news. Um,
mm,
Often it's best doing it with a blunt knife. Just get it over and done with. Just tell somebody very quickly, this is what's happened. There's no going
mm,
back. There's only moving forward. And let's deal with what we have to do afterwards. But right now,
mm.
this is what we have to deal with.
Right.
I don't know. I think that just the best way of doing it is coming together as a family and kind of getting through it the best as you can and supporting the weakest amongst you to help them through.
Mm. Yeah, I love that, and supporting the weakest,
Mm.
and also hopefully supporting the ones that pretend to look the strongest
Correct.
but aren't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, sorry to have like made this nosedive a little bit, but
No, it's okay.
what are maybe three, one, two, three things that has been a surprising joy, even in this terrible experience that you've gone through? What are some surprising, like real awesome things that have happened,
Mm.
regardless of the fact that this is obviously one of the toughest situations that you've gone through?
I think, I mean, my family is quite estranged, and that was something that was established when I was younger. We have
Mm.
mum's side of the family, we had dad's side of the family, and seeing people come together in celebration of somebody's life, um,
Mm.
and seeing that everybody getting together and having that talk or that drink and
Mm.
about how great somebody was is definitely a positive thing that's come
Mm.
out of that.
Mm.
And I don't know, reconnecting with family members that I perhaps didn't know,
Mm.
something positive that's come out of that, and
Mm.
me just kind of realizing that, you know, I don't know if it's a positive thing or not, but going back to what we were saying about arrogance and having that chip on your shoulder, it's that reminder that no, you can't always be like that. You can't always be somebody who thinks they're invincible, and you're not going to get sick, and that you're bulletproof and all of those little things. These things can sneak up on anybody at any time and just whack you and just make you realize that this is it, boyo. You know, it might not be a positive thing uh, to internalize, but
Mm.
mentally it makes you aware of yeah, how
Mm.
little time you have sometimes. And I don't think that's
Mm.
a bad thing, because it makes you focus
Yeah.
on the positive things that you experience.
Wow, this has been this has been a very interesting 1 hour.
Mm,
I didn't know you before this. I feel like I've known a lot of unique things about you, and just really very proud of the journey and the adventure that you've taken. And I'm sure that your dad is super, super proud of you wherever he is,
mm,
and that your mom obviously knows that you're doing your level best, even though you can't be in the same country.
yeah.
And happy birthday, Scott!
Yeah.
So, Richard, leave us with one piece of advice, whether it is a person who is hoping to get into the space of radio, or somebody who's going through a tough time during COVID, or someone who is grieving their parents, the loss of their parents, or someone who's
Right.
just trying to deal with life. What is your one piece of advice um, that is just something that you live by all the time?
I was interviewed recently by a bunch of guys for a podcast, and we had a very similar discussion about what piece of advice would I give, and I think it's that do not be afraid about just getting on a plane, or and I use that as a metaphor, getting on a plane, going somewhere that you don't know, and just trying things out. Just get out there, do something, learn about yourself, not worry about what other people think, and just do it. I come from a very small village within a very small town, and all I wanted to do was just see what was out there. And so I did whatever I could, and all I did was buy a plane ticket. I just bought a plane ticket to somewhere that I didn't know. I didn't know anybody, and I just got on that plane, landed, and then just thought, well, if I can survive here, then I can survive anywhere. If you don't
Mm,
speak the language, you don't know the culture, all of that. If you can do that, you can do it.
that's fantastic. We'll all wait for things to clear up, and I'm sure a couple of us will be buying some plane tickets very soon after.
I hope so. Yeah,
Richard, thank you so much. I think a couple of things that
pleasure.
I just wanted to recap, that I found most valuable, was that there are things that you never imagined that could be so small, like a radio,
Hmm.
like your own radio, that could break silence and create super high levels of connectivity, and it
Yeah.
stays in your memory for years and decades to come. It can bring people together, and it can bring families together as well, and obviously the music that comes with it too. I love the concept of breaking the silence and be something really, really small. I also love your concept of luck and how it is some invisible force that seems to be nudging you. And if you're just paying attention, you could be nudged in the right way.
Yeah.
I love that concept of small town boy arrogance. That's really, really nice. It's a wonderful feeling to have, especially when you've gone through what you've gone through. As you said, you had medical issues, you had a broken back, like a twisted back.
A twisted back, yeah.
Twisted back. That doesn't sound very nice. Some speech problems. Did you say speech problems?
Yeah. I had a bit of a stutter when I was younger. Yeah.
And you're freaking on BFM. From where to what? The other day I was talking to someone who had learning disabilities, and today he can speak like 10 languages. This is insane.
Yeah.
I also love that little idea of wearing an armor and feeling like you're quite protected in scenarios. And that little experiment of how you can make someone feel very comfortable or not comfortable just by small little things that you can do.
Right.
I think what really blew me away was my arrogance and ignorance, sorry, not arrogance, but my ignorance about how there are so many professions out there that on a day-to-day basis are exposed to very difficult news. And in your case, something that's repeated over and over again, and that there's huge opportunity there to, ensure that different industries, different occupations get the mental or the support that is required for mental well-being.
Yeah.
And last of all, we aren't invincible. We may hope to have this idea that nothing can come in our way, but we all have this illusion of invulnerability, and something will happen to us and can happen to us. And for you, that was, in your words, having a dad snatched away from you. But that's also, in life's funny way, it brings you something else. It brings, for you, your family coming together and you connecting with people that you never knew in the past. And I guess one thing that is really, really valuable is to buy a plane ticket.
That's it.
Try something
Buy a plane
new,
ticket. Yes.
You've never tried before, and you never know. You just never know.
That's it.
And with that, 29th of April is someone's 40th birthday. So we're just going to do a happy birthday song for him. So Richard, on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, let's go.
Happy birthday to you. I cannot believe I'm doing this. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Scott. Happy birthday to you. There you go. Done.
What's
Please.
the message for him? What's the message for him?
Scott, get on a plane. Get on a plane. No, I love you very much, Scott, and I miss you very much. I hope you're doing well. There you go.
Well, with this, I thank you so much for your time, Richard. It's been a pleasure. It's been an honor. I feel like I know you a lot more. You were just a face. Now you're a human being.
All right. You too, Hettel.
See you. All the best, okay?
All right. Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.